All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring a deeply fascinating, kind of mind-bending philosophical trial about exactly why we read. And, well, fair warning right out of the gate here, this explainer is looking directly at you. The text we're unpacking today is structured entirely as a legal proceeding, and I really want you to realize that you aren't just the audience, you're the subject.
I want you to consider this honestly for a second. Have you ever felt a little twinge of guilt for staying up way too late with a novel, knowing the real world was out there waiting for you? You know that specific feeling at the back of your neck when it gets super late and the responsible thing is definitely to put the book down, but instead, you just turn the page anyway? We've all been there. And that exact feeling is what brings us to court today. Because in this metaphorical courtroom, which is built entirely out of your own attention, by the way, you are the defendant sitting in the hot seat right now. You're officially charged with willfully entering an agreement with a fiction and diverting your very real, very valuable cognitive resources to people and events that literally do not exist. Part 1. The courtroom inside you. So let's establish the setting of this trial. It doesn't take place in a physical building. Actually, it takes place right in the architecture of your own mind, and it's being meticulously recorded by a clerk holding this massive, heavy ledger. The very moment your eyes scan the first word of the text, boom, your name was entered into this ledger as present and attending. The clerk notes every single act of human absorption into fiction. And the wild part? You can't step outside this courtroom to get a better look at it, because the act of looking is the courtroom itself. Part 2. Reality makes its case. Okay, so the trial begins. We turn over to the prosecution side of the room, facing the cold, overcast light of facts, where reality is ready to make its case against you. Patient and completely unconcerned with theater, reality points to an enormous number, 10,000 plus, representing the sheer hours you've spent reading fiction in your lifetime. I mean, think about that number for a second. This represents a totally irrecoverable opportunity cost. For every single one of those thousands of hours, you were physically here, but mentally you were somewhere else entirely. The cost is the room you left. The cost is the real life that wasn't happening while the fiction was. Now, the crucial point here is that reality isn't indicting rest or pleasure. The prosecution is bringing a case against substitution, what they're calling a systemic cultural pathology of preferring an invented world over the material one. You are quite literally spending metabolically expensive, real human emotions on fake stimuli instead of directing them toward the real world. Reality is basically just asking you to look at the cold hard math of your choices. Part 3. Fiction defends the reader. But wait, then fiction stands up to defend you. Unreliable, generous, and super insistent, fiction changes the vibe of the room entirely, countering reality's cold arithmetic. So reality argues that reading is a pure cost, right? But fiction argues that the self isn't fully formed prior to stories. Instead, it acts as this crucial practice space that actually builds the architecture of your empathy. You aren't losing yourself in a book, you're expanding the space inside yourself to hold other people's complexities. Fiction's core argument is absolutely fascinating. It says that your capacity to attend to another human's complex inner life was actually developed in the safe space of the invented, meaning you are literally constructed by the very reading hours reality is calling a crime. Simply put, you are made of what you have read. Part 4. Time and attention testify. To settle this profound back and forth, we've got to call some witnesses to the stand. The prosecution starts with two of the most fundamental forces in your life. First up is time. Now, time admits it's never refunded, sure. But time also points out a huge flaw in reality's case. The alternative to reading isn't always some meaningful, deep, real-world engagement. Let's be honest, it's often just passive scrolling or low-density distraction. Time testifies that the hours spent reading leave a dense residue that permanently expands the human interior. And then attention takes the stand and drops something even more profound. Attention reveals a really stark contrast. Modern life demands this fractured, distributed state. We're all constantly multitasking, checking notifications, carrying around this ambient anxiety. But reading a novel, it forces you into a gathered state. You are undivided and completely present. Attention argues that this gathered state, which you experience in that gap of not yet knowing what happens next in a story, is the very thing most worth preserving in a human life. Part 5. The Real Dead. The trial then shifts its focus to reality's absolute most devastating witness, the real dead. This represents the actual people you've loved and lost in your real life. The courtroom just falls completely silent here. Reality asks a genuinely painful question. Have you ever found that you have more fluent language for a fictional death than the bewildering, shapeless grief of a real one? Does a character's death feel somehow cleaner because it was perfectly designed to land, while your real loss just feels blank and inarticulate? But fiction steps up, offering a really powerful rebuttal. Fiction isn't replacing real grief. It's language trying to touch the deepest interior of human experience. Fiction counters reality brilliantly here with this concept of the grief gap. Basically, fiction explains that crying over a book isn't some theft from your real grief. Actually, scratch that, it's not just a defense, it's essential practice. It acts as routine maintenance for your emotional system, keeping those empathy pathways open and preventing your emotional doors from resting shut for when real loss inevitably shows up at your door. Part 6. The Unfinished Verdict. After hearing these incredibly heavy testimonies, the judge calls for an extended recess so the jury can finally deliberate your fate. But who exactly is judging you? Well, your jury is composed of 12 figures borrowed from other books. Each brings their own distinct fictional baggage to deliberate your guilt. You've got the Russian character totally paralyzed by understanding all sides, the detective waiting patiently for all the evidence, the child who just feels everything without adult irony, and even Juror 12, the pure, unwritten potential of a character in the book you haven't even read yet. The court hands this bizarre jury these totally unanswerable questions, like, is reading an escape from life, or is it a form of living? Does the empathy you practice in a novel actually successfully transfer to the real world? The court knows the real work isn't about finding a clean, easy answer to these dilemmas. The real work is learning to live comfortably in the tension between them. Then, in this stunning meta moment, the judge steps down from the bench, breaks the fourth wall, and speaks directly to you, the reader. The judge reveals that the whole trial was purposely designed to make both reality and fiction correct simultaneously. I really want you to let that sink in for a second. You are completely guilty of the opportunity cost, yes, but you are also completely innocent because it built the very foundation of who you are. The judge admits that the true magic of reading exists in that unresolved gap between the intention and the outcome. The fictional world is radically dependent on your attention. When you close the book, or hey, when we finish this explainer, the courtroom vanishes. But the residue, the empathy, the expanded interior space, that gathered attention, that argument continues right inside of you. So as you head into the night recess of your own reading habits, and right before you inevitably pick up your next novel, I want to leave you to ponder this impossible question. If you are quite literally made of the stories you've read, who is truly responsible for the fact that you simply cannot stop turning the page? Think about that and keep learning.